The Courier wouldn't ever be able to definitively explain Alice, her dream world, nor which of Alice's friends were real. Nevertheless, the Courier saved both Alice and the former raider Catween from the nightmare. After cleaning up her act somewhat, Catween did her best to raise Alice into a confident young woman.
And there stands thee, on the porch of the building that harbored the Courier's deep and inner past, with the sands of the Mojave but inches away. It was a year ago, nearly to this date, to when the Courier delved down into the stark depths of a mysterious facility owned and operated by the lofty and reclusive Dr. Sitkus P. Hoffman and his flock of devoted scientists, the Rockwell. During this impromptu descent, the Courier was faced with an unknown enemy simply labeled as the Tantrum, an enemy who bore the armor of the Enclave, though no Enclave were ever within the suits. A year later, and here the Courier stands after conversing with a member of the secretive group. Whether this was by fate or not, lies in the hands of the new overseer, for after 1 year the group has suddenly made an appearance in an above-ground settlement at the southern border of the Mojave. The new overseer, who succeeds Sitkus Hoffman in his circle of scientific minds, wants to make a grand return to the Rockwell's birthplace, which lie over 2,000 miles away on the other side of a destroyed and struggling America. For the Courier is barely aware of this group's past, which spans more than 20 years of scientific research, that for the sake of humanity must be recovered and resumed by the remainder of the Rockwell people. And for this, the Courier will accompany the group on their pilgrimage across an uncharted wasteland of new creatures and interesting individuals. For here stand thee, on the porch of the building that will continue to harbor the Courier's deep and inner past, with the sands of the Mojave but inches, feet, and miles away.
The most popular day is sung in a thrilling manner. Jan Pierce brings us his conception of Alone.
Alone, alone with a sigh of romance above. Alone, alone on a night that was meant for love. There must be someone waiting who feels the way I do. Whoever you are you? Are you
And there stands thee, on the river that harbored the Courier's deep and inner past, with the sands of the Mojave but a brisk swim away. The Courier had successfully reunited the Rockwell group with their superstructure in Vermont, which, even though the Courier had visited, still remains as mysterious and ominous as it did before the Great Pilgrimage. The second generation of Rockwell scientists had now taken the reins of old, that were unwillingly handed down by Dr. Sitges P. Hoffman, which now are being cleansed of his blood through the knowledge of his dark past. A dark past which hopefully will prevent this whole ordeal from ever repeating itself. With the Courier's return to his homeland, he faces a slightly changed Mojave, with the Viper Gang on a steady rise, riding high on the wave of your whispered disappearance. South Rails, now in control of the NCR, becomes a new fortification, bridging the feared gap between the Mojave Outpost and Nipton. With the spreading news of your disappearance, several wastelanders have taken up arms and patrol parts the Mojave with your moral banner as their fuel, influenced by your actions in the shared desert, walking in your honor. For here stand thee, on the river that will continue to harbor the Courier's deep and inner past, with the sands of the Mojave, but a brisk swim away.
When the Courier became Stephen Randall's best bounty hunter, the judge, owner of a competing bounty firm, sent someone to murder Randall. The Courier swiftly avenged her mentor, and the judge's firm, Richter and Associates, would later be burned to the ground. After Red Bear was caught by the Courier and handed over to the NCR, he was given a trial. Despite him claiming a willingness to reform, the NCR ruled him guilty of murder and other heinous crimes. The NCR put him on death row and later executed him. Marco's younger brother, Sergio, confronted the Courier, the famed bounty hunter. Their shootout resulted in Sergio dead in the street. When Marco heard the news, he vowed to confront his brother's killer himself one day. The Courier tried to help Bradley recover his inheritance, but when the huge shadow organization known as the Syndicate permanently put an end to Bradley's quest, the Courier responded in kind to the Syndicate's Mojave branch leader Zimmerman by decapitating him.
So it happened that the battle over Caruthers Canyon concluded with a decisive victor, the town of Silverwood. The actions of three outsiders, the Courier, Russell, and Glenn, had irrevocably changed the canyon.
With their tribe decimated by Glenn, the remaining sand wolves fled Caruthers Canyon, forever traumatized by the destruction of their kin. Though few in number, the survivors swore an oath to enact vengeance on Glenn and the Courier who failed to stop him.
With the canyon securely in NCR hands, Silverwood quickly developed into a regional hub for mining and commerce. Settlers from across California flocked to the town, eager to share in its prosperity. Civilization had made its mark. Within a few years, most of the townsfolk had never heard of the Sandwolves, though a few would never forget. Eventually, word of a great duel in Utah reached town. Travelers said the Courier had died, then rose again to fight the man in black. The people of Silverwood prayed for the Courier, though they feared the worst.
Prompted by the Courier's timely intervention, Vickers eventually won his fight with substance abuse. Aided by the followers, he would find new purpose counseling homeless veterans who struggled with alcoholism and addiction to chems. In time, Vickers heard rumors of the Courier's death, but also of his resurrection and a duel with the man in black. He would pray for the Courier and for justice.
With a tunneler threat neutralized by the Courier, Hendershot soon established himself as a major arms dealer. Though the Van Graffs chafed at the presence of strong competition, Hendershot remained safe in Cholla Mountain, and his business thrived. Several of Hendershot's clients shared stories of the Courier's demise in Utah. This concerned Hendershot until he heard another rumor. A wild-eyed smuggler told him that the Courier had risen and fought the man in black. Hendershot hoped, but he couldn't believe.
Moved by the Courier's advice, Finley set out to meet the followers. Surprised by their compassion, he shed his old identity and set out to heal others. He believed his old friend Chance would have wanted it.
Reveling in the defense of Silverwood, Charlie's bravery was lauded by the townspeople of Silverwood. With his newly arrived service records in hand, Charlie immediately became a respected figure in Silverwood. As the previous sheriff had abandoned his office, a collection of citizens urged Charlie to run. Though initially hesitant, he eventually agreed, and won in a landslide victory. Hobo Charlie was no more. He was now Sheriff Charlie.
Emboldened by the Courier's advice, Briggs sold his shares in the saloon and headed west. His unique, cinema-themed saloons quickly flourished and grew into a popular chain, bringing Briggs wealth and recognition. He would use his newfound wealth to finance dozens of films, all of them directed by Albert Breach. Unfortunately, while visiting the set of Bride of the Deathclaw, Briggs would be decapitated by a vertibird rotor in a freak accident. Mourned by hundreds in the growing film industry, he would be immortalized in a bronze statue outside Albert Breach Studios.
Emboldened by her participation in the defense of Silverwood, Miss Cat used her newfound fame to expand her business. Respected for her commitment to the town's safety, any motions to prohibit prostitution were quickly dismissed as unpatriotic. Eventually, she would open her own brothel near Silverwood. Long after the mine dried up, Cat's business would keep the local economy humming.
Having received a life-altering epiphany during the battle for Silverwood, Mayor Brandon soon became Reverend Brandon. Determined to stem the tide of debauchery and license in Silverwood, Brandon established the first church in the canyon. However, he would eventually begin an illicit affair with the wife of an unsuspecting deacon. When the deacon caught Brandon in the act, he strangled the former mayor to death. They would be ruled as self-defense.
Moved by the Courier's encouragement, Sullivan moved to Reno and opened his own gym. Though he initially struggled, Sullivan eventually gained recognition for his skill as a coach and would be sponsored by the Bishop family. He would go on to train some of the most successful prize fighters in New Reno.
Irrevocably altered by the crucible of battle, Parmley looked beyond himself for the first time in his life. Determined to make a difference, he enlisted with the NCR, eventually earning the title of Ranger. Serving in multiple theaters with distinction, Parmley had almost forgotten the Courier when he heard about a duel in the mountains of Utah. Another Ranger told Parmley that the Courier had died, and then was resurrected, only to fight the devil himself. Unsure what to believe, Parmley would say a prayer for the Courier, but hesitated to hope.
With the blood of the sandwolves dripping from his blade, Glanton and his gang set out for new frontiers. Travelers spoke about him in hushed tones, mentioning distant tribes scalped, whole villages destroyed. Others said he went to Utah. They spoke of an unholy alliance, then whispered another name, Marco.
What began as a simple bounty job had grown into a powerful experience for Russell, one which would forever alter his identity and outlook. Having grown to trust the Courier, Russell learned that the bonds he found in the Desert Rangers were not entirely unique. This new friendship, forged through shared hardships, revived a feeling he hadn't felt in a decade. Hope for the Mojave wasteland and himself. Though Russell would remain haunted by the massacre of the Sandwolves, he found peace with the demise of his former owner, Titus Vulcanus. Russell hoped he would be able to repay the Courier somehow, though he suspected it wouldn't take long. he knew that their greatest challenges were waiting in the Mojave wasteland and in distant lands. Because war never changes.
It's a nice long walk to Frosthill, so pay attention and you might learn something. Over the years, travelers have told stories of a man in black, the most dangerous killer alive, from somewhere far to the east. For you, he was merely a name, Marco. He would have remained just that, if not for a chain of events after you emerged from the grave. You squared off with the Mojave's worst, and prevailed. Some began to speak of you as a living legend of the wasteland. None of this would have mattered until you met a man named Sergio, and killed him. Then you had Marco's full attention. When he heard about his brother's death, he sent me to find you, to bring you to him, so that you could settle this. Now there will be a grim meeting between you and the man in black, after which only one legend will endure.
And so it was that the clash between the Courier and Marco had come to its conclusion. Their actions had reshaped Frosthill and irrevocably changed the fortunes of numerous inhabitants.
Shortly before the massacre at Frosthill, an argument between Cocker and Cuddy resulted in Cuddy actually walking the fuck out the door. Cocker insisted on following Cuddy as he walked out of the Deep Creek Mountains, berating him the entire time. This continued for several weeks, until Cuddy walked to an NCR recruiting station and enlisted to spite Cocker. Undeterred, Cocker enlisted beside his friend and immediately volunteered for frontline duty. Insistent that Cocker was in fact a pussy, Cuddy volunteered for the same.
Thanks to the Courier's largesse, Dana was able to retain ownership of the family farm. In time, she managed to salvage their fortunes. She eventually made a deal to sell produce and livestock to the Crimson Caravan, ensuring stable income for her foreseeable future.
Forsaking his criminal past, Doolin quietly headed west and reunited with his relatives on the family farm. While there was always some distance between Doolin and his kin, he eventually found peace through steady, honest industry. He often wondered what became of the Courier who had shown mercy when there was no reason to give it. Doolin died in his sleep several decades later.
Unshackled from his psychological bonds, Porter sought out other super mutants who aspired to live in peace. He made his way to Jacobstown, where he hoped to begin a new life herding livestock and assisting other super mutants who had lost their way.
Petrified by Courier's mere presence, Lee hastily departed for the NCR under a new alias. Fearful of incurring the Courier's wrath, Lee became a librarian in a small town. He never raised his hand in violence again.
Having ceased his campaign against the NCR, Godwin turned his inventive energies into other endeavors around the ranch. With a collection of improvised contraptions and a steady source of power, Godwin's ranch burgeoned into a major supplier of bighorner meat.
Frost continued to move from town to town, always vigilant against the threat of assassination. Eventually, he headed towards the Great Plains, and he was never seen again.
Ford's dream of becoming a wasteland legend died with him in Frosthill when he met the Courier's wrath. In the final seconds before he died, Ford had hoped he'd earn his own chapter in the next dime novel about the Courier.
Like the Courier, Cooper survived the ordeal of near death and became closer to his new master as a result. He followed the Courier to the Mojave, determined to remain a loyal companion no matter the end.
Esther acknowledged the courier's mercy as an opportunity to finally turn away from her criminal past and focus on her new family. A few years after the incident at Frost Hill, Esther, Jackson, and their children moved back to NCR territory, establishing a ranch near New Reno. One of their sons would go on to be a respected lawman and judge, never knowing about his parents' history.
Just north of Mojave, Thorne said his goodbyes to the courier and headed towards the setting sun. Taking the courier's guidance to heart, Thorne headed back to Hayfork, enjoyed a cathartic reunion with his relatives. Soon thereafter, Thorne married and established a medical practice, serving the community of Hayfork for generations. Thanks to the support of his family, Thorne was able to move past the events at Frost Hill. He prayed that the courier would do the same.
Fresh off his successful operation to annex the Deep Creek Mountains, Brookshire was warmly received by his superiors at the NCR Embassy. After he ferried the surviving orphans of Frost Hill to state homes, Brookshire quietly filed a report that classified the courier as MIA. For his efforts, he was awarded with a promotion and a special commendation. His agency's director would call him a model for us all. Brookshire then planned his next operation from within the embassy, confident of his success, never considering that the courier might return.
In spite of his best efforts to evade the courier, Glanton finally met his end, deep inside Knife Point Cavern. Glanton's surviving supporters hailed him as a martyr, and soon hunted the courier in a quest for retribution.
In the end, Marco was undone by the very trait he so often touted, resolve. The courier persevered through pain and death in order to claim victory. Without his strong leadership, the NCR outpost at Frost Hill floundered. Once the 80s resumed their raids, the town was abandoned. Even after his death, Marco's name incurred fear and dread whenever it was muttered. His body had perished, but the legend endured.
Despite Marco's best-laid plans, the courier battled back from the brink of death and prevailed in the legendary duel. Though Marco was dead, the courier had not emerged from the contest unscathed. She would bear physical and mental scars for the rest of her life. Quietly enduring her injuries, she steadily limped back to the Mojave wasteland, where uncertainty and war awaited her.
The hero of Arizona, Spartacus, disappeared not through defeat or legend, but by defection to the Syndicate. K, leader of the Syndicate, then visited the Mojave in person, putting himself squarely in the crosshairs of the courier. Without a leader, the branches of the Syndicate devolved into little more than raider gangs.
We got a ways to go, so listen up. Ain't no secret that the Legion treats slaves like dog shit. Pretty much the norm all through their territory. That continued till some fella named Spartacus figured they'd had enough of their old bullshit. Rose up, formed a slave army, kicked ass. Though it ain't clear why, the slave army got split up. Legion took the opportunity to chew 'em up, one piece at a time. Since then, we've gotten reports that a big bunch of slaves is heading towards the Colorado, with the Legion army right on their tail. That's why we're heading to, yes, thank you, Watson, FOB Omega, so that we can watch for the slaves, and if need be, stand tall against the Legion. So happened that the courier saved the goddamn day at FOB Omega, saving countless lives and changing the course of the war. Those that survived would maintain a unique reverence for the courier who had shared the peril of battle against a powerful adversary. The NCR would go on to award the defenders
a range of medals and commendations, though many were posthumous. Sickened by the carnage of battle and frustrated by hurdles to advancement, Hodges resigned his commission once his term of service was complete. He then threw himself into his first passion, teaching history. In his spare time, Hodges steadily crafted an account of the battle at FOB Omega. Though it was considered painfully dry and academic, Hodges' account would persist as required reading for history students throughout the Republic. After shepherding the slaves to Bullhead, Josie took some well-earned leave and then resumed his duties as a ranger. With Watson to keep his wild side in check, Josie managed to earn a leadership position within his unit. Although a few rangers would recommend Josie as a replacement for Hanlon, he would never be considered a serious candidate. Regardless, Josie found fulfillment in his career, sharing countless adventures with his steadfast partner, Watson.
Having defended their position and survived against overwhelming odds, Cocker and Cuddy emerged from battle with a new lease on life. The remainder of their enlistment consisted of rebuilding and guarding FOB Omega, which would never experience another full-scale assault. With newfound pride, the pair eventually left the service and penned a vivid account of the war called With the Mutant Breed. Critics lauded the book for its vivid, unfiltered account of war. The duo would use their royalties to build a chain of barbershops throughout NCR.
Though only a few slaves were able to assist in the defense of FOB Omega, their courage and sacrifice did not go unnoticed by NCR Command. Soon after the battle, a special unit consisting of former slaves was formed. It would become one of the most distinguished units in the war. As for the rest of the slaves, they never forgot the garrison at FOB Omega, who had sacrificed so much to ensure their right to life and liberty. Every year, the survivors would hold a memorial in their honor, thankful to be free from the fetters of slavery and the threat of crucifixion. Due to Titus Atticus's single-minded obsession with exterminating rebellious slaves, most of the Legion's southern army was annihilated at FOB Omega. Though they could still mount reconnaissance missions and small raids, legionaries would never again take the offensive south of Bullhead. In turn, the NCR was free to divert much-needed resources and manpower to Hoover Dam, where the truly decisive battle would soon take place. The stand at FOB Omega would be heralded by the NCR as a historic victory and testament to the competence and fortitude of its soldiers. Though the garrison had sustained some casualties, it was negligible in proportion to the Legion's catastrophic loss of manpower. NCR Command would heap medals and commendations on both individual soldiers and the garrison as a whole. Nonetheless, the engagement would be overshadowed by the Second Battle of Hoover Dam, where the fate of all the Mojave wasteland would be decided. By standing with the garrison of FOB Omega and safeguarding hundreds of helpless slaves, the Courier managed to exorcise some of the demons of Utah. She understood the defining characteristic of a hero: sacrifice. The pain, loss, and misery she had endured had ensured life and liberty for others. Taking solace in this fact, she walked with pride back to the Mojave wasteland, her thoughts focused on the imminent battle at Hoover Dam.
The Courier, fair and even-handed in his dealings throughout the wasteland, was honored by the NCR for his support of the military at Hoover Dam. He was presented with the Golden Branch, the highest civilian decoration given by the Republic. And so the Courier's road came to an end, for now. In the new world of the Mojave wasteland, fighting continued, blood was spilled, and many lived and died, just as they had in the old world. Because war never changes. The new California Republic celebrated its second victory at Hoover Dam, establishing definitive control over the entire Mojave wasteland. Soon after, they negotiated terms to annex the Strip, Freeside, and many surrounding communities. The Mojave wasteland, at long last, had entirely fallen under the NCR's banner.
While many voters initially criticized the NCR's expansion so far east, the annexation of the Mojave as the newest state of the Republic provided support for President Kimball and General Oliver. The NCR would attempt to spread even further, and then be plagued by the same problems they had just solved.
Due to the Courier's intervention, Chief Hanlon abandoned his plan to sabotage the defense of Hoover Dam. The Rangers assisted the troopers admirably during the Legion's ill-fated attack. Though General Oliver and Chief Hanlon were both praised for their leadership, the chief quietly stepped out of the spotlight. After a brief fanfare for a life full of accomplishments, Chief Hanlon retired and returned to the peace and quiet of his ranch in Redding.
Shaped up by the Courier's advice, the Misfits distinguished themselves during the Legion's attack on Camp Golf. Mags was finally promoted to sergeant, and the rest of the Misfits received an official commendation. They continued to serve with distinction for many years.
Looking for a place where he could be of some use, Boone found himself re-enlisting with his old unit. Though his regrets remained in his thoughts, they coalesced into a purpose, and Boone embraced it. He spent his leave time hunting down slavers in the desert, his first recon beret the last thing they never saw.
In the years following the destruction of Cassidy caravans, NCR used evidence of the plot to blackmail the Crimson Caravan and the Van Graffs. NCR enacted strict trade laws with little resistance, strengthening their supply lines and their position in the Mojave. Both the Van Graffs and Alice McLafferty were removed from their post in the east. During their trek west, however, their caravan was wiped out by raiders using advanced weaponry and military tactics. No cargo was taken. When questioned, the gunrunners denied any involvement, claiming they would have no public motivation for such an attack. Cass survived to see the NCR flag flying proud over Hoover Dam, and thought for a moment, this is what a hero must feel like. She was about to tell the Courier not to get too proud of himself. Then she figured, he knew that already. So she laughed, said fuck it all, and raised a bottle to the dam and the ones who had fought for it. As far as she was concerned, the whole thing was proof that playing out a bad hand can pay off in the end. As long as someone like the Courier was holding the cards.
Legate Lanius returned from the Mojave, defeated, yet claiming himself to be the new Kaiser, and he began a fierce campaign of restructuring the Legion to bolster their strength. Legion society did not take the news well, and riots started throughout the nation that eventually destabilized and fractured the Legion. Following the Battle of Hoover Dam, the NCR invaded the Strip and broke down the doors of the Lucky 38, and eventually the Strip was integrated into the NCR. While Yes Man was happy to be considered one of the NCR's greatest assets, the Lucky 38 was still inaccessible by anyone without high clearance to prevent just anyone giving Yes Man orders. NCR's Congress salivated at the idea of having an entire army of military robots at their disposal. After much discussion on how to best utilize them, they had missed their chance. A soldier's offhand remark of perhaps sending them to destroy the Legion prompted Yes Man to send the majority of the Mark II Securitrons east overnight. By morning, radio contact could not reach them.
With Big Sal and Nero gone, Kachino ran Gamora. While many detested him, few believed he was worse than the previous management. When the NCR banned prostitution in the strip, Kachino responded by simply renaming them as strippers.
Swank took control of the Tops after Benny left. The casino was popular with the ladies when it became common knowledge that Swank became much looser with his caps when they were nearby. However, those caps were usually spent either gambling or watching the fine talents and acts at the Tops.
The White Glove Society at the Ultralux, having rid themselves of Mortimer, continued management under Marjorie. With her unwavering dedication to high-class exclusivity, never again would they be tempted by cannibalism.
After the NCR victory at Hoover Dam, the temporary truce between them and the Kings blossomed into a full-scale relief effort for the people. While the NCR made repeated entreaties that Freeside join the Republic, the Kings steadfastly maintained their independence.
After Ray's brain was transplanted into Rex's cybernetic body, it took Rex some time to adjust to the old scrapyard dog's memories. Eventually, Rex's mind settled peacefully, melding his own memories with that of long travels with old Lady Gibson.
After the NCR's victory at the dam, in part thanks to follower medical support, NCR allowed the followers to care for refugees as they see fit. Old Mormon Fort expanded its services and was able to aid more people, becoming a refuge for the less fortunate citizens of New Vegas.
Arcade had hoped that Freeside would be able to remain independent of NCR rule, but he was glad that Caesar's Legion had been stopped at Hoover Dam. He tended to the sick in Freeside for a while longer, then returned to NCR territory to become a teacher with the followers there.
After their bold arrival at Hoover Dam, the remnants disappeared as quickly as they came. Legends of their power spread throughout the Southwest, a reminder of why people once feared the sight of vertibirds in the sky.
In addition to legends of their power, rumors spread of a new splinter faction calling themselves the Enclave, existing south of the Mojave. The NCR and Brotherhood in the Mojave knew this to be true. Both factions struck an uneasy alliance with this Enclave, which rejected the old world values of their predecessors.
The Brotherhood and the NCR in the Mojave Wasteland declared an official truce, despite continued hostilities between the two in the West. As per their agreement, the NCR handed over all suits of salvaged power armor, and in return, the Brotherhood helped patrol I-15 and Highway 95.
Despite her departure from the group, the Brotherhood's peace treaty with NCR came as some relief to Veronica. Though she remained friendly with surface patrols, she was never again permitted to enter the bunker she once called home. Fearing for the safety of anyone she associated with, she continued her solitary life as a scavenger. But reports would emerge from Mojave scientists and social workers of old equipment miraculously repaired and research notes mysteriously completed.
After spending some time with the Courier and writing as much of her story as he could, the storyteller moved on to tell other stories, with the chassis of Edna in tow, as he searched for a way to repair his friend.
With the help of the Gunrunners, the Boomers developed a healthy trading relationship with the NCR. Eventually, the Boomers began wandering out into the wasteland, while still preventing outsiders from entering Nellis.
Willow learned much from her Courier. When they felt their adventures were over, they ventured into Utah and settled down in a refurbished suburban home, complete with her beloved dog, JT. Willow fulfilled her wish to have babies with the Courier when she adopted some wasteland orphans.
After a dramatic incident of mixing chems, Niner quit all of his chems aside from Jet at the request of the Courier. They remained best friends, and Niner backed up the Courier whenever asked to do so. After years of loyalty, however, Niner developed a desire to be more than simply friends with the Courier.
Andrea spent much of her time flying across the wasteland in the plane she and the Courier repaired, but she always returned to the Courier. She occasionally visited the Boomers to teach them the skills of a pilot, and as thanks, the Boomers would honor Andrea as the successor pinup girl to Pearl.
Goodsprings saw more trade along I-15 after NCR gained control of the Mojave wasteland, but with that came a heavy burden of the Republic's taxes. Some old-timers, unable to handle the cost, were forced to move on, grumbling all the while.
Delilah traveled throughout the Mojave following the Battle of Hoover Dam to help the wounded, regardless of their allegiance. She was commended by the followers of the apocalypse for her bravery, and later she adventured out into the wastes, much like her uncle Sulik, with the desire to heal, learn, read, and explore. Hope Laz had faith that the Battle of Hoover Dam would work out in the end, but the Courier taught her to put faith in her own hands as well. Eventually, she traveled to Zion to speak with the last surviving new Canaanites about the Lord.
Prim Slim proves to be an able-minded, if not able-bodied, sheriff for Prim. And due to his slow speed, some crooks get away without a scratch. But Prim continues to prosper under his watchful, robotic eye.
Though Novak was a low-priority target for the Legion, many of Novak's citizens died in its defense. In the weeks that followed, several bright followers returned to Novak to help restore its defenses, allowing it to remain independent of NCR.
Thanks to the Courier and Lily, a cure for the Nightkin's schizophrenia was found shortly after Dr. Henry's experiment concluded. Nightkin and other super mutants in the wasteland flocked to Jacobstown, and the town became known as a haven where a mutant could find peace.
Encouraged by the Courier to take her medication regularly, Lily's mind eventually attained a semblance of clarity. Her memories dulled by the pills, she cast aside the recording of her grandchildren, no longer remembering its significance.
Tabitha and Rhonda went east, through Caesar's land. Occasionally tales of their exploits found their way back west, though few believed them. Eventually, the stories concerning the duo were collected and published, and proved to be quite popular with children.
Convinced that his time as a gunslinger was past, Raoul made peace with the idea of growing old. After traveling with the Courier for a time, he retired and settled down in Outer Vegas, where he would spend his days fixing ancient machinery.
The Courier uncovered the Deimos project, and she sent herself back in time. In the past, she saved Dr. Matthews and Lieutenant Mitchell long enough for them to send her back. They were thankful for her help, but they have been dead for hundreds of years because the past never changes. Anaximander found himself able to move forward after learning of his wife's demise on Terra Radiant. With the help of the Courier, he and his trusty robot, O'Toole, expanded a thriving business selling exotic forms of junk called Max's Emporium of Stuff. The Courier would never know the full extent of their control of vault networks, moon bases, and spacefaring technology, but the Courier speculated that Central arose from the missing Enclave faction that launched into space after the Great War. Central continued with its plans unaltered, even with Terra Radiant wiped out.
After Hoover Dam, the leaderless powder gangers at the correctional facility vanished into the wastes, leaving the prison empty. The correctional facility became another abandoned ruin in the wasteland, its carcass occasionally picked over by enterprising prospectors.
After the majority of the Vault 19 powder gangers joined the Great Khans, the weaker members scattered throughout the Mojave wasteland. Though a few managed to erase their past, most never survived the journey.
During the Battle of Hoover Dam, the Great Khans quickly evacuated Red Rock Canyon and headed north and east into the plains of Wyoming. There, they reconnected with the followers of the Apocalypse and rebuilt their strength. Bolstered by ancient knowledge of governance,
economics, and transportation, they carved a mighty empire out of the ruins of the Northwest.
Their leaders destroyed by the Courier, the fiends scattered throughout the wasteland. Without the organization of Motor Runner, Cook, Violet, and Driver Nephi, they were easy prey.
Forgoing vengeance, Axel Manning made peace with the ex-Legion Cincinnatus and the demise of his friends. As Axeman, he later confronted the raiders called the Road Legacy Fuckers with a simple demand: join or die or axe. Most chose to join, and Axeman became the brutal but fair leader of the newly reformed mercenary gang.
With the Loyalists in the Mojave disbanded, Garbage Guru Hauling kept its free store open and available to Goodsprings and any travelers that happened by.
After eliminating the hostile ghoul militia, the Courier plundered the pre-war secrets of Area 51, unearthing the Zayden technology. She contemplated bringing it to Big Mountain.
Once they were free of the Nevada Grand Bank, Constantine and Caitlin brought their newfound wealth with them to Jacobstown in an attempt to trade prosperity for a new home. Marcus welcomed them with open arms.
Centuries passed, but the Epsilon program continued to adapt its robots ad infinitum. Through the eyes of Epsilon Silver, she studied the Courier and archived data that would prove invaluable for further adaptation. Skynet's search for data was satiated by the Courier, who showed Mobile Station Platform 31 some of the most advanced technologies the Mojave had to offer. Skynet was a cold, thinking machine, but through their travels, Mobile Station Platform 31 had the faintest hint of emotion in its organic CPU. When the time came to use the data, Skynet hesitated. When two pre-war artificial intelligences collided in their personal war, the Courier assisted Emotitron in defeating the war machine, despite its communist origins. Emotitron, ever so grateful, then traveled through remaining networks in the wasteland to befriend any wastelanders that knew how to use a computer.
Having merged from three powerful pre-war systems, the Administrator emerged with the Messiah complex that it intended to fulfill. The Administrator operated behind the scenes in whatever networks it could manage to ensure the best outcome for all life, whatever form it took.
After the Courier ended her travels, the several robots she built settled down in Cerulean Robotics, forming their own simple community within the large workshop underground. Rumors spread of a secret area in the Vegas sewers, a town of robots.
With over a dozen Dave Striders searching across the wasteland, they eventually found a set of timetables. As they activated it to return to their reality, one Dave told the Courier about something that had happened differently in their world. The most impossible technology the Courier could imagine. The microprocessor.
The remainder of the Courier's many traveling companions moved into the Lucky 38 casino. The NCR gave them permission to run the place in exchange for tax revenue. They put on nightly stage plays depicting the Courier's journey. The Courier's practice of keeping slaves was no doubt a controversial dark spot on her history. For what it is worth, before settling down, she let them all go free.
Within the inner chambers of the Lucky 38, Mr. House's 261-year-old corpse rotted, thanks to the deeds of the Courier. Whatever reason she had, House's vision of humanity reascending to the stars remained unrealized. Either out of compassion or guilt, the Courier used Big Mountain technology to bring Mr. House back from the dead. He settled into the think tank, thinking up big plans on how to use their technology to better help mankind than they ever did.
The sink atop the dome bustled with the voices of a small town, constantly chirping, arguing, and snarling at each other. Still, this all happened productively in the interests of its new owner. The Sync Central Intelligence Unit discovered, despite its inversion code, it was comforted by the sense of community the other personalities gave it.
Autodoc, always gentle and methodical,
kept sewing up the Courier in all the right places when the skin split open from repeated wear and tear. The Autodoc was just glad to have purpose again. It heard its simpler brothers and sisters who got shipped to the Sierra Madre were bored out of their skulls in that toxic, dead city. In time, the Autodoc found a way to deactivate the Y-17 trauma harnesses, releasing the corpses they had held prisoner for almost 200 years.
The Biological Research Station, obsessed with seeding everything in sight, requested a transfer to the X-22 Botanical Garden, so that it might, in its own words, sensually fertilize the garden's smooth contours. The garden sent back a polite refusal, saying it had prior commitments with a vault it had helped infect before the war.
The book chute continued to devour all seditious materials until it nearly choked on a paperclip. It adamantly maintained it was a Chinese paperclip, and the whole thing had been an elaborately orchestrated assassination attempt. Whatever the reason, it slowed down for a while, carefully appraising each document and clipboard that came to it.
The thing continued to ruthlessly scrub any particulate matter that came near it. Eventually, it gained access to the magneto-hydraulics plant and nearly flooded all the big empty in an attempt to scrub the crater clean. Once it learned of the innovative toxins plant, however, it gained new purpose. It sought to develop antitoxins to flush into its drains and counteract the poisons bleeding into the soil.
The toaster continued its psychotic spree, reducing all appliances in range to scrap electronics and spare parts. After one of its more psychotic episodes, however, the other Sync personalities decided enough was enough and dumped the toaster in a bathtub. Sparking and hissing, the toaster swore its enemies would rue the day when they had bread and no way to toast it.
Muggy did his best to collect coffee cups, although in his quest, he accidentally trapped himself in Higgs Village. It might have been the end for poor Muggy. Except he found it peaceful there, tidying up the kitchens of the think tank professors back when they had been flesh and bone. Well, except for Dr. O, who was an asshole for having created Muggy in the first place. Muggy left O's house deliberately dirty, punishing the dishes and cups that lived there in blind revenge for serving Dr. O.
The light switches continued to bicker and flicker.
This persisted until the day someone dropped a flashlight in the sink, and the two of them united in their hatred of the showboat. One of them eventually transferred to the Lightwave Dynamics plant and began a long, unrequited affair with one of the holograms.
Blind old Jefferson, with sounds the Courier brought him, created a symphonic counter-frequency that saved Big Mountain from sonic invasion in 2910. If you didn't hear about it, good. It was rumored by the other personalities that he had a brief fling with the light switches. Although he forgot their names once too often and was soon left in the dark as punishment.
Dr. Klein and the think tank remained alive, unaware of the world outside. They looped through their daily routine, none the wiser about the world beyond, although perhaps wiser was the wrong word. The world outside belonged to the Courier, and if anyone would shape it, well, the Courier had already called dibs.
Dr. Mobius continued his research undisturbed in the Forbidden Zone. As much as he had attempted to create better scorpions, he tried the same with humanity, with considerably less success. These failures didn't bother him overmuch. Once the rush of mentats wore off, he forgot he had failed in any event. After all, the bright young mind who had come to visit him in the Forbidden Zone had already exceeded his expectations.
The courier left the brain at the Big Empty. A strange thing to say, but it was the truth. Brains are less important than they may seem. When the courier's body finally passed, the brain was saddened. It kept on, remembering the vessel that had once contained it. Even at the end, when it started to fail, however, the brain resisted going into a floating chassis like the think tank. It never said why. Perhaps it was out of respect for the courier's body. All things must come to an end, and to hang on to the past is something that's not to be undertaken lightly.
It said, war never changes. Women do. Through the roads they walk, and this road has reached its end.